You don't need to be
No,
mic'd. You don't need to be mic'd.
yeah, you and your, no, wait, here.
Is that on? Okay, there we go.
Cause you're gonna be introducing, and then once you get down, you give the mic to, wait, no, here on the communication mic.
Okay, there we go. Good. Brianna, there we go. Okay, now I should hear. Why didn't I hear? Sound.
Hello? Hello? You're hearing it, or sir?
Is it?
Yeah, look. I'm talking into it.
But I'm saying, can you hear it? Up here. Okay, office.
It's picking up sound.
Is it playing it right now? I can't see, or I can't hear it.
Hello? I mean, we didn't hear the whole practice run we went through. We never heard our voices.
Oh, we didn't.
No, but we just saw that it was giving feedback.
Okay, that just went off.
The TV went off.
Okay, well, we want to welcome you this evening to the Native Christian Leadership Forum. We have folks right here in Phoenix that are joining us, and then we know we have others from as far as the internet or on our chief website. So again, just a big welcome to everyone that is here. We're thrilled because we have a special guest, Matt Holgate, and I know his dad really well, outstanding pastor. And it's great to see a young man taking on the role of leadership. And he is going to be speaking to us on sexual abuse and the impact within Native America. Today is a special day also because it is Indigenous Peoples Day. And so we have a lot to celebrate today. What I would like to do is I want to honor some of our elders. And I put together a short video, and these were different elders that have really kind of blazed the trail in regards to Native ministry. They have committed their whole life into serving their own people. And for 2 years now, we have been impacted by COVID. And we've seen these dear ones go on into the presence of the Lord. And so I want to just recognize them tonight. Also, I want to make a statement because what that does is leave a real vacuum in the area of Christian leadership, whether that's in our churches, our homes, our tribal councils. And so I want to encourage you to really pray for that next generation that is coming on. So the baton's been passed, and I would say now it's really in the hands of our young leaders. So, Isaac, you lead us on, and we will show the screen.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us at the Native Christian Leadership Forum this evening. We have an exciting session with Matthew Holgate that is taking the time to share with us his presentation on sexual abuse and how we should respond as Christians to this issue in Native communities. Matthew's really done his research on this topic. He's given this presentation several times, and he's been in prayer about it over the years. And we're excited to have Matthew Holgate with us this evening. So with that being said, I just want to welcome up Matthew Holgate.
Sweet, sweet, sweet. Well, thank you all for having me, Brother Huron and your staff. I really appreciate the invitation to being here with Chief Ministries, and I was super excited to see you all today and to be with our online viewers as well. So I want to talk to you all today about a topic that is really, really dear to my heart. And I know we've mentioned sexual abuse and basically Native American land today in tribal nations. But I want to talk to you about something that's an umbrella term for different forms of sexual abuse or different forms of abuse that's really plagued our nation, and it's plagued our tribal communities, believe it or not. And it's something that I've had the privilege of studying, and that I've had the privilege of hosting different conferences and meeting with different world leaders, local leaders, government leaders about this issue, specifically on Native American reservations, on tribal nations, and tribal lands. So I want to talk to you all about this topic of human trafficking. So the session that I have entitled today is Understanding Human Trafficking. And to just start with my slides, I want to do an introduction of myself. As Isaac introduced to me, you all, my name is Matthew Holgate. Brother Huron also mentioned, you may know my father, Pastor Jackie Holgate, who pastors a church in Flagstaff, Arizona. So that's kind of where I was raised and grew up for a big chunk of my life. But about myself, I currently work at American Indian College. It's now called SAGU American Indian College, and it's right here in Phoenix, Arizona on Peoria and 15th Avenue. And I serve there currently as the Director of Student Life. So I oversee a big chunk of student development there for their offices. And I'm just so blessed to be living here and to be in Phoenix, Arizona now. I recently just graduated this past May, actually on May 5th of this year, from Vanguard University with a Bachelor's of Arts degree in communication. I did a lot of my time studying communication with technology, emerging media, different forms. So I always tell people when I introduce my major is I knew how to do Zoom before the pandemic even started. I had classes on Zoom and different things just to make sure that we were understanding different areas of technology there. But not only did I get a Bachelor's of Arts degree in communication, I also triple minored. So I had a minor in religion, I had a minor in journalism, and I had a minor in anti-human trafficking, which is what we're talking about today. So I've been able to travel to different places. I've been to Argentina. I've planned trips to the Navajo Nation, all over Orange County, California. I planned a trip to Romania, to Kenya, and different places to talk about this topic of human trafficking. I've talked about this topic to students in schools. I've talked to students really everywhere, all the places that I go to. It's just something I'm really, really passionate about. But not just to students, but to pastors, the local church, to government officials. I had the opportunity this summer to partner with the Navajo Nation's First Lady and Second Lady office to host a human trafficking conference, the Navajo Nation's very first anti-human trafficking conference. So, as I said, I am full Navajo. I'm from the Navajo Nation. So if I have any Navajo visitors viewing online, all the way from Phoenix, Arizona. If we're family, I am Mini Goats Clan, born for the Bitterwater Clan. And part of my portfolio in doing human trafficking is I worked for this organization called the Global Center for Women and Justice. So the Global Center for Women and Justice is based out of Vanguard University, and it's an Assemblies of God, faith-based, NGO, non-government organization that aims to teach people about human trafficking. And this is where I got my education, and this is where I was able to partner with a bunch of people in this topic of human trafficking. But not only is human trafficking something that I've seen firsthand in different areas that I've learned about, that's really struck in my heart, it's something too I feel like is a biblical principle. And a scripture reference I always go back to is found in Proverbs 31:8, and the NLT version says this. It reads, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves," and then semicolon. So it doesn't say comma. It's not the next thing. It's not the second thing you do, but semicolon. Ensure justice for those being crushed. And I feel like in our society today, in different areas across native land and tribal nations, people are being crushed. Our people that we're serving for 500 plus years in evangelism are still being crushed today. My dad's spiritual father that I call Grandpa Dobie Weasel. I don't know if you're familiar with the name, but my Grandpa Dobie Weasel from a young age would always tell me, Matt, there are millions of Native people here in the United States and in Canada, and less than 3% claim to be Christian. And that's such a tragic statistic that we have to wrestle with, that we have to live with, and I'm tired of that. I'm tired of living with that statistic from now until forever. As long as I live, I will be talking about this topic, and because I believe it is such it's a way of being salt and light. And it's really a part of my calling, aside from being a professional in higher education. I still continue to do this work to talk about sexual abuse and human trafficking. So, what do you picture in this room or online when I say, or when you hear the phrase human trafficking? Just think in your heads. You can probably think of some movies. You can think of some different things where, like the movie Taken, or if you've seen other movies, I know there's movements happening, the missing and murdered Indigenous women. Things like that are becoming to be a topic of a topic around the table. It's actually, I've seen it more on social media. I don't know if anyone has TikTok. I do, but sometimes when I'm scrolling through my For You page, I'm seeing a lot of more of be aware of human traffickers. Be aware of traffickers here in these different areas. But we say those things and we don't really realize what we're talking about or what human traffickers even are. So some of you tonight may have, let me see here. So some of you may be picturing images like this in your head, where it's usually a girl in chains, not being able to speak for themselves, that are just kind of in bondage to this narrative. But I want to tell you today that this is actually a wrong depiction of human trafficking. Most victims of human trafficking today are both mixtures of male and female. Most victims of human trafficking today are not in a basement being chained to the wall with no means of fending for themselves. A lot of victims today that we see in the realm of human trafficking or sexual abuse is psychologically in chains, not physical, but psychological. So a lot of the victims that we see, they have cell phones, they're able to leave the house, they live with their parents, different things like this that we aren't really familiar with, that I want to familiarize with you all today. And I want to start by talking about the definition of human trafficking. What is human trafficking and why are we talking about it? So the definition of human trafficking is a crime that involves exploiting a person for labor, services, or commercial sex. This is what the U.S. Department of Justice states human trafficking is. And I'll say it one more time for our viewers online if you don't screenshot, but human trafficking is a crime that involves exploiting or a person for labor, services, or commercial sex. So, why is this topic important for you? Well, so many reasons beyond just that people are being crushed in our society today. As ministers, I grew up as a pastor's kid, a full-time pastor's kid here, and I grew up in the church all my life. And I had these conversations with my dad. I've had these conversations with my mom, who's our children's director at church. And why is this important for not just the world, because it's number one, it's wrong, but why is it important for the church? And during my time at Vanguard, studying this topic, hearing pastors, hearing superintendents from Africa who are struggling and wrestling with this idea of trafficking and sex abuse, this topic is so important for all of us in this room, all of us online, ministers, people that work in schools and education, wherever area you work in. It's important for you to know because the church needs to be the safest place on planet Earth for children to be at. It needs to be the safest place for people to grow at. It needs to be the safest place for people to go to as a haven. And unfortunately, I know in some experiences, I can't say that about some churches that I've been to. I can't say that about all ministries that I've been able to work with. And it's just a tragedy that we're seeing happen before our eyes. But we need to understand that the church, above all else, even above school, above the home, above different organizations, the church should be the leading people that are ensuring that our students and our children are being cared for correctly and that they're in a safe environment. This happens a lot, and that's what I want to encourage you all with today. As ministers, in your respective places of where you work, as business people, whatever you do in your life, this is why it's important. It's because of this calling that we are salt and light. And one of my pastors was speaking, and he said, salt and light it's not an achievement. You don't get an A+ for being salt and light. When you go to heaven, God's not saying gold star, gold star, gold star, gold star. Here, it's a responsibility for all of us. Being salt and light is a requirement by God for us to be in this world today. So, why is this happening in tribal nations, you're asking? I know we're talking about some definitions and different things, but I want to kind of back up and talk about why this is happening in tribal nations. You'll see here as I'm talking a little bit more, one of my mentors, Dr. Sandra Morgan, likes to say there's a perfect storm. And the perfect storm is essentially different risk factors, different areas of topics that we're going to be speaking about today make up a most vulnerable place for trafficking to happen. And every tribe is different. What works for the Navajo Nation might not work for the White Mountain Apache Reservation. What works for the White Mountain Apaches doesn't work for the Kukupah or different areas around the world, and even in this nation and in Canada. Some things are not different, and we're not all aligned in the same thing. So we're very unique people, and that's why it's happening, is because number one, we have a lack of law enforcement presence sometimes. You know, on the Navajo Nation where I'm from, even there, we have fewer than a couple hundred police officers that are in the landmass of a area larger than the size of West Virginia. And so it starts with law enforcement. We have policies that are not in place. In some tribes, we can't even prosecute non-natives who are committing sexual abuse or committing human trafficking. There's no laws for those things. In the Navajo Nation right now, we don't have laws that are specific to human trafficking. So we can't prosecute human trafficking when it's happening. But we can prosecute for sexual abuse. But if labor trafficking is happening, we don't have those things set up in place yet. So it starts with policy as well. So this is the perfect storm that I'm talking about. These different risk factors that are playing into this cloud, and it's building up and building up. And those are our tribal nations. And it is just the reality that we're living in, but we can take steps as a church, as Christian leaders, to reverse these things, to create ministries and to create a safe environment for people to not only, I'm not asking you to go back to your churches and make a Native American rescue team. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking that we understand this topic so that when it approaches us, we're better able to address this issue. And so many of us on tribal nations are not aware. We're not taught about the human trafficking. We're not taught about sex trafficking. We're not taught about sex in general. And these are things that we need to be talking to our older teens about, our teens and our children about, because there are some things that are happening. You know, I grew up in a Native home where a lot of my family members would talk about taboos, right? You know, you don't talk about those things. If something's happening to you with your teacher, or if you're a student and you're saying, this is happening, someone's involved in my life in this way and I'm not comfortable, you don't talk about that. Those are things you don't talk about in this home. So it's a cultural thing too that I want to talk about right now. So on my next slide, how can you be an ally? Cultural considerations for this, specifically in tribal nations, from what I've been able to gather with my research, is identifying the people that you're working with. You know, Brother Huron mentioned today is Indigenous Peoples Day, and it's a day that we honor. And it's not a day for us to boast, and it's not a day for us to, march down the streets of Washington, D.C., but it's a day for us to honor each other. It's a day for us to recognize, I've met people who didn't even know Native Americans existed in the United States of America in 2022, and that's a reality. And we need to start with identifying our neighbors, identifying the people that we're working with and the people that we're serving. Whatever tribe, or here in Phoenix, we are home to so many different tribes and thousands of Native American people here. And we need to be identifying them as who they are culturally. Each tribe has their own culture, language, and origin. We're not all the same. We are all different. And I know you've probably heard this conversation before, that we are not the same, but I throw that in there because sometimes they go teach this and some people aren't aware of that. One of my first interactions during my undergraduate with a person in my hall, and they were asking me how I communicate with other Native Americans, talking about my language. And I said, well, I have the Navajo language, and then like my friends who are Hopi, they have the Hopi language. And they were like, so you all don't speak the same thing? And I was like, no. And so it's just the uneducation there. And that's why I like to talk about these things. If you're not aware, we all have different origins, our different cultures, and our different languages from tribe to tribe. Taboos, family dynamics, general trauma is a reality in most homes. A lot of the students that we work with, they do not have a traditional family structure. The father's missing, the mother's missing. Most of my students are raised by grandma and grandpa all their lives. This is a reality that is for them. Some of my family members are going through this thing at the same time, and this creates generational trauma that's passed down. Something my dad used to always say to me is, when we are talking or trying to counsel with a student or with a parent who's struggling in their duties as a parent, is, your child's going to see you do this and they're going to grow up and to do this, to do probably even worse things than you're doing right now, and it's going to break your heart, is what the conversations my dad and I have all the time. So cultural considerations also, there are no words for rape or sex in most native languages. And I want that to be just a realization for you to talk about, because that's important if we're going to talk about these issues. How are we going to communicate with our grandmas who only speak their native languages about something that's happening to their grandchild after school in an extracurricular activity, or that's happening to them at church? How are we going to communicate those things with them when we don't even have words with them? So we have to get creative with all of these things. We have to get creative in how we're communicating these potential risk factors that are happening to people, just so that they can be in the know. Most families do not talk about sex with their children, but only for ceremonial purposes. Most tribes, have puberty ceremonies and different things like that, and that's really when it's talked about. One of my instructors and a good friend of mine, Ruthie Hanchett, who works at the Global Center for Women and Justice, talks about this, that we need to teach our children that they have ownership over their bodies, that they have ownership over who they are, and that nobody across the board can touch them, that nobody across the board should be violating their circles as a child. We don't teach those things, huh? If we remember back to when we were children, mine was not too many years ago, but some of those things, like, we don't learn those things, but it's important for us to start talking about that. Maybe not in the church context, but in the context of talking and educating parents on this is what is happening to children, and this is how we can prevent it. So these are just some cultural considerations, and also historical trauma. As I mentioned, Indigenous Peoples Day. There's a lot of things that create historical trauma to be true. Historical trauma is a reality for a lot of Native people and Indigenous communities, especially with recent times in the boarding schools. I know with all the things that's been happening in Canada and across our nation, and them finding children and unmarked graves has been really, it's hit home for me, because my dad went to boarding school, and I just think this could have been my father, this could have been my grandparents. And it hits home for a lot of us, and it just creates this process inside where we're unable to really understand or communicate those feelings. And in sense, we go to different things like human trafficking, or we set ourselves up to be vulnerable. And then something too, I think I should also mention is the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women movement, MMIW for short, which has then expanded itself into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Men. So if you haven't heard about this movement that started a couple years ago, and around 2016, there was a statistic that came out that stated that there were statistics for missing people and missing persons around the world globally, even into the indigenous tribes in Africa, except for Native American women here in the United States of America. And one of the most fast-growing countries and the most powerful nation in the world, and we don't even have these statistics for these women who are going missing every single day. And this is a reality that we have to figure out to fight. We have to find these people, and we have to understand why they're being murdered and what is happening here. But I put this slide up here to mention this, that sometimes when we talk about human trafficking, we correlate MMIW with human trafficking. Sometimes this is not the case. Sometimes human trafficking and sexual abuse happens without it being MMIW. And I'll tell you a couple of reasons a little bit later, but it needs to have a means and a purpose. And human trafficking at its core is a financial benefit. People exploit people for their financial gain or for their own personal benefit. MMIW doesn't occur in most cases, but when it does, it is human trafficking. So I just want to throw that in there and make you aware of this, that as we also talk about. So kind of taking a little step off from the cultural texts and the how to being a cultural ally, I want to talk to you about human trafficking in its form. So human trafficking, as I said, is an umbrella term for different things. Sexual abuse is one of them. I'll show you all a whole list of different things that can contribute to human trafficking. But this is really one of the reasons why I was so gravitated towards human trafficking, is because it addressed a lot of things that I witnessed firsthand as a student, or that my family members unfortunately went through, whether it was child sexual abuse, or it was potential kidnapping, or it involved some sort of sexual abuse physically, psychologically, mentally. It involved all these things, and that's what gravitated me towards this specific topic. So we say human trafficking, and I want to throw another term in there called modern-day slavery. Many times you'll hear human trafficking referred to as modern-day slavery. This is just another term or vernacular that we use to describe what human trafficking is, because at its core, it is modern-day slavery. So what's changed in the past couple of years? And when I'm saying the past couple of years, I don't mean like 500 years ago, since, all that happened, hundreds of years ago. I'm talking about in the past like 50 years, 40, 30, 20 years. What's changed and what's new? And I'll talk about it in a couple different contexts. So the number one thing I want to talk to you about is the number of slaves. The number of slaves right now in the world, victims of human trafficking, tell us that currently we are at the peak that we have ever been in our history, that we are at the peak that this nation, the United States, and every single country in the world has ever seen in its history. Currently, right now, there are more than 40 million people in bondage to modern-day slavery or human trafficking. So to kind of contextualize that for you all, that's about the population for the entire state of California. And if that's not kind of clicking, it's there are more victims of human trafficking than the population of the entire country of Canada. So we have an issue here, right? If there are that many people, and human trafficking keeps increasing and increasing every single day. And also, the next thing I want to talk to you about is the cost of slaves and the relationship between slave and owner. Kevin Bales points out, and Kevin Bales is one of the co-authors of the Global Slave Index. If you want to research that, I'll be talking a little bit more about the Global Slave Index as well, but they research different statistics on this. But Kevin Bales said, during the height of the transatlantic slave trade in 1840, the average field worker cost about $40,000 in today's money. That was an investment, right? $40,000 is a lot of money that probably won't see, or some of us won't see in a couple of years, right? It will take us time to earn those things. So that's how much one slave worker costs. So that was an investment that you would want to feed, you would want to house, you would want to care for, at least to ensure a return on the financial investment, right? But today, the global average for price for a slave is somewhere around $90 to $100. That's a big difference today. That means the investment is low and return is a huge profit, making human beings expendable. So just let that sink in for a little while on just these things that happen here. And then the next one is globalization, which really just talks about how human trafficking is everywhere. It's a false statement if someone says, oh, that only happens in Phoenix, in the southern area of Phoenix. That doesn't happen in Flagstaff. It doesn't happen in Tucson. That's false. Human trafficking happens everywhere. It's happening across this nation, and there is no country today that does not see human trafficking or some form of sexual abuse happening in their communities. Every community, tribal nation, we see this happening in different forms: sexual abuse, incest, pornography, different things like this are all factors into this globalization that is just growing even bigger and bigger. One of my good friends she's a Navajo from the Navajo Nation. She's works for Amber Alert now, but she was a tribal sex crimes detective for many years here in the state of Arizona. And one of her first cases of human trafficking was a young girl on a tribal nation who was being auctioned off on Facebook Live. These things happen, and the people who were buying her for different prices were coming from different areas of the world, not even just here in the United States, but it was happening everywhere. So it is globalized. Something new too, in the past couple of years, that the United Nations has partnered with advocates against modern day slavery is creating legislation where slavery is not legal across the world. The United Nations had published this in the year of 2000. We talked about human trafficking being in every single country, but yet the numbers are still growing. This is not legal, but people are still doing it because it is creating financial gain. So out of this conversation we just had, what to remember: there are about 40.3 victims of human trafficking or modern day slavery today. And I'll break those down for you. So most people, when they think of human trafficking, we only think it's sexual abuse, right? That's all you hear today. We only think it's sex trafficking. We hear about young girls being taken and being forced to do sexual acts, but actually 68% is forced labor of human trafficking. Forced labor, I'll give some examples a little bit later, but forced labor is essentially doing things, domestic servitude, forced marriages. Most of those involve children having to clean houses and different things. And 22% is sexual exploitation, 10% is state-imposed forced labor by local governments. You've seen people who are forced into the military at a young age without being compensated at all. That's what I mean by state-imposed, is that the government is doing those. So only 22% is sexual exploitation. So you're probably thinking, why is this? Why don't I hear more about labor trafficking on the news ever? Why are we not talking about this if it's 68%, right? Well, if you think about it, it's not legal to sell sex in the United States, with the exception of Las Vegas and Nevada. It's not legal to have prostitution. These are illegal things to do. It's not legal to have to sell sex, but it is not illegal to wash dishes. It's not illegal to wash clothes. It's not illegal to mop a floor, right? Or to be in a hotel cleaning sheets. These things, it's not illegal to do those things, right? But it is illegal to sell sex. And that's why we see such a big difference in media today of why labor trafficking is not being talked about more, is because it's harder to identify and it's harder to see today. But as students today, y'all are going to be some students with me, as I am one too. I wanted to bring to you all the AMP model. The AMP model stands for Action, Means, and Purpose. So when we talk about trafficking, we talk about modern day slavery, this is what we need to have in order for us to prosecute a trafficking case. There needs to be an action, there needs to be a means, and there needs to be a purpose. So an action is induced recruiting, harboring people, transporting people, provides or obtains or so obtains a person. And I want you to know that when I say transports, human trafficking doesn't always take one person out of another place. You're not crossing state bounds. You're not going from different country to country. That doesn't need to happen. But these different things we do see happen. I'll tell you, one of my first cases of human trafficking was actually what got me into this work. Happened on the Navajo Nation, and it was grandparents selling their granddaughter for sex because they didn't have firewood for the winters. So this is the reality that some people are living in, and she was in her own home. And that's why I mentioned earlier that the church needs to be the safest place on earth, because sometimes the home isn't. Sometimes school isn't. Sometimes extracurriculars aren't. So that is our call. But going back to the AMP model, that doesn't need to happen. But those other things listed do. The means for human trafficking are forced fraud or coercion. So people that are being forcefully enacted to do these things, being threatened with their life, or if there are fraudulent crimes happening, some things we see with people who are foreign nationals that come to the United States, their traffickers will actually take their documents and their passports and different things and use those as to take advantage of people, and coercion as well, and forcing people to do these acts. And the purpose is it needs to be commercial sex trafficking, or labor services, which is labor trafficking. So the AMP model is for all people, but for minors and children, there doesn't need to be forced fraud or coercion. It's illegal for anywhere in the world, really. It's illegal for children to consent to sex and children to be working without compensation. This is why we have child labor laws. I know some people make a fuss about that, but this is why, because we see it so commonly in different countries, including the United States, where children are being forced to work in harsh conditions, not getting paid, not getting fed, and all these things. So forced fraud or coercion is not needed when it comes to minors or children. So the AMP model, these are just some of the types of trafficking that I mentioned a little bit earlier that can happen. So sexual exploitation includes prostitution, pornography, bride trafficking, massage parlors, brothels, escort services, phone sex lines, internet dating, exotic dancing, or stripping. And these are things that we've all seen, and they're happening right here below our faces. I was able to meet with one of the leading sergeants for crimes in the Navajo Nation recently, and we had a conversation. And if you're familiar with hogans, they're this octagonal shaped home that is a traditional home. And there was one that was sitting on a hill in a very transient community. But it was a hogan, and it looked kind of deserted. It was boarded up windows. It had boarded up walls. Like, it was very in an isolated place. But what they had found, that for a couple of months, it actually was a strip club, and they were serving alcohol, and they were using Native girls as dancers and strippers and these things. And people drive by this place every single day, and it was an operation for a long time, actually. So it happens even in your communities, in places you don't think it will happen. Child trafficking, any sexual exploitation of a minor, child marriage, illegal adoptions, labor, including begging, domestic servitude, sweatshops, restaurants, etc., child soldiers, and then forced labor is all of those ones from domestic service, domestic work, childcare, debt bondage, manual labor, working in agriculture, mining, landscaping. So these are things that you can kind of see the difference now, why this would be 68% more than sex trafficking, is because some of these things are not illegal. A lot of victims of human trafficking have a phone, and they're watching other people's children in a community park. It happens, and we're just not aware of it, that there are psychological bounds that are keeping them from stepping up as victims. So what are some risk factors that we can talk about today? as I'm kind of closing this segment, some risk factors that we can talk about are a lot of these that are listed here. There are a lot more out of the circle, but these are the ones that in all of our years of research in human trafficking and sexual abuse, this is what we see to be some of the main risk factors that victims are facing, is that they're youth. Youth are more likely to be try to be trafficked or try to be victims of trafficking. And I say youth because even though there are 40 plus million people being trafficked today, about 25% of those are minors. They're under the age of 18. And most of them are victims of sexual exploitation because of different reasons that people have. Youth also, we'll move on. Race. So race is a big affiliation across the board with people. And Native American people in specific, if you haven't noticed, Native American people, there's not a lot of us. There's not a lot of Native American people across the world. And this causes a need or a desire of some people to want Native people more. I read an article once where there were some girls that they were finding in different parts of Southeast Asia because they looked like Asian girls. And they actually were Native American girls from different tribes of the plains up in North Dakota and Montana area. And this just happens because there is some sort of desire or want to have a more exotic or more kind of, however you want to phrase it, from a community that is low in population numbers. And because of history, abuse is a big risk factor. And if you know any single Native American, we have a lot of history abuse. We have a lot of abuse from the United States government, the Canadian government, and I'll say it, we have abuse from the church. There's a lot of different areas of abuse that Native people have endured over the past couple of years, and we see it coming out today because they're more at risk for human trafficking. History of prostitution and family. Many of our students that we had worked with, or organizations that we also work with, that help get young girls or young boys out of human trafficking or out of prostitution, usually had a prostitute in their family. Usually their parents could have been a prostitute, and that could have happened, and we see that a lot. Forced displacement, that's moving, telling people, you can't move here, or you can't live here, you're gonna need to move somewhere else. That happens sometimes, and the confusion of it all just gets them in a new environment and sets them up to be at risk. The lack of support system. As Native individuals, there is a very, very big lack of support in our homes, in our schools, in the places that we work, and the places that we live. There's a lack of support. The lack of immigration status for more undocumented persons and foreign nationals. We see a lot of LGBTQ youth, and specific youth, but also adults who are at risk for a lot of this. And that's just what we see. That's just the reality. And then poverty and the lack of resources is also another risk factor that we've studied a lot. So how can we start addressing this? We can start addressing this by putting ourselves in one of these models. This is called the victim-centered trauma-informed approach. And we have these different things. It's called the 5 Ps is what we call it at the Global Center. So we have partnership, prevention, protection, prosecution, and policy. So I'll go over these really quick because I got 2 minutes here. Partnership is to connect, engage, and collaborate. Prevention, to inform, identify, intervene. Protection, recover, restore, reintegrate. Prosecution, investigate, litigate, obligate, and then policy. Legislative, governance, capacity build. Me and what I do in my work, doing sessions like this, teaching you all about sexual abuse and human trafficking, I fall into the prevention. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to inform you all so that you can go home into your communities and prevent human trafficking from happening. I want you all to be informed and empowered to do that. So that's what I do. Most of my work is in prevention. That's where you're going to see education, you're going to see conferences. Those are those things. Protection is the people who are doing the aftercare work. I know right here in our city of Phoenix, we have one of the largest and fastest growing human trafficking rescues with Dream City, or the Dream Center. And they have a couple of different locations that are doing this now. So those are the people that are in the protection. They're the aftercare people who are taking people out of this lifestyle and helping them get back on their feet so that they can be successful. They can have thriving families and a thriving support system. Prosecutions is our law. Prosecution is like our police officers, our law enforcement, those people, and then policy are the people who make our legislative decisions, the people who make our policies, the people who make law. And then partnership, of course, is this. It's connecting, it's engaging, and collaborating with one another. So I hope you all have learned a little bit of an intro of what human trafficking is and how sexual abuse ties into human trafficking. So if you stick around after our little break here, we're going to come back and I'm going to talk to you all on how we can use this knowledge now to be an ally, how you and I can be partners, and how we can support our churches better, how we can become personal allies, and what we can do to stop the demand of human trafficking here in our city, in our communities, in our nations. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So stay with me, and we're going to talk about being an ally. But I hope everybody, if you have questions, I think we have a question box. And if you have questions in here, I'm more than happy to talk to you all about this topic. But yes, I hope you all learned a little bit more on just what human trafficking is in its form. And I empower you to tell others what you learned just now. So thank you all.
Perfect. Perfect. Thanks, Matt, for that thought-provoking presentation on sexual trafficking. Yeah. But yeah, for those joining us online, we'll be showing a brief video on highlighting different aspects of what sexual trafficking looks like from a video that Matt had sent us, and so we'll show you that right now.
Center for Women in
for us, like here, we'll be breaking for a time of like food and eats, and I can just open us up in the world of prayer, and we'll be having hot dogs and chili dogs and chips and stuff. So, and yeah.
Okay, welcome everyone. This is the Trauma-Informed Classroom workshop. I work in Bakersfield City School District as an educationally related mental health therapist. And I am currently an adjunct professor with Vanguard University through the Global Center for Women in Justice. So I'm so honored to be here and be a part of this conference, to be able to share information and resources with the Navajo Nation and the community. So really, really excited. And again, just so honored that we have this opportunity to be here today. And please join us tomorrow. We've got tons and tons of additional resources and training opportunities. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so my goal is, we've got a short amount of time, but my goal is that we obtain some general understanding about trauma, how it affects kids, their brain, trauma, how it feeds into human trafficking, and learning some possible techniques that you can actually start implementing in the classroom, or at least take advantage of the resources that I'm providing to help build those resources in the classroom setting, along with identifying practical ways to build resilience in the classroom. So those are just some of the goals. Again, we've got a short amount of time to get that done, and so hopefully we'll get through all of that. So what is trauma? Number one, traumatic events can be dangerous. They can be frightening, maybe a cause of bodily injury of some kind. It might even look like a threat of death. A lot of people experience trauma when maybe they've been through a car accident, like a major car accident, or some kind of abuse, domestic violence, you name it, right? Some of the potential reactions that we see as a result of that trauma can include fear, terror, helplessness, and physical symptoms like heart racing, vomiting, loss of bladder or bowel control, and so many others. But these are just some of the things that we see that come along with some pretty severe trauma experiences. And so I've listed out some traumatic events here of things that, again, people may categorize as traumatic events, and some people may or may not. But these are some of the typical things that we see in the mental health field. So I want to point out one thing in particular, which is generational trauma, because the Navajo Nation and other tribal communities have been so affected by this in particular, due to so many factors. I can't even go into all of those, but I want to highlight this because I think it's important for us to be aware of it and to know that there is hope. There are resources. You can continue to guide and build resilience even through that experience. So I want to share a few things here. So generational trauma may begin with a traumatic event affecting an individual, or traumatic events affecting multiple family members, collective trauma to a larger group or community, cultural, racial, ethnic, or other group populations. Those at the greatest risk are in families and groups that have experienced significant forms of abuse, neglect, torture, oppression, and racial disparities. Families can make resilience in their new legacy by actively seeking to address the trauma that they've experienced. So building resilience through open and loving communication between generations is one of the best ways to loosen that generational trauma and its grip on the family and the community. Healing happens when family members speak up and work through any hurt, pain, or abuse from the past. And those are some of the recommendations, specifically coming from the Amen Clinic, who deals with so much trauma in California and across the world. They've got clinics all over the place dealing with extreme trauma. And so I just want to really highlight that there is hope. This doesn't mean that, it's a death sentence for this community or this family or somebody who's experienced some kind of trauma. There is hope at the end of the tunnel. So I want to share a quick video. Here we go.
Our experiences during our early years actually affect how we think, feel, and behave. Adverse and traumatic childhood experiences can derail development, which is why it is important for schools to be trauma-informed. Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are sadly pretty common in our society. ACEs take various different forms, including abuse, neglect, domestic violence, and difficulties stemming from mental illness and drug and alcohol abuse in the family. ACEs are more prevalent in children from disadvantaged and under-resourced communities, and discrimination can add to the stress and hardship for some. Not all forms of adversity are traumatic, but many do cause harm. In the most severe and long-lasting cases of adversity, a child's psychosocial functioning can be inhibited. Among other things, this can impact their ability to form and maintain relationships throughout their lives. Schools can provide the perfect setting to promote resilience and lessen the effects of adversity, but for some children, experiences in school pose a whole other set of emotional challenges. Traumatized children can have difficulty regulating emotions, staying on task, and relating with others, which can prompt bullying from peers and harsh discipline from teachers. This treatment can add even more stress for children and can lead them to question their safety and develop mistrust in authority figures. This can be particularly impactful if those authority figures lack awareness in how trauma affects cognition and behavior, or if they are being limited by their own implicit biases, emotional challenges, or exhaustion. Efforts are underway to change how schools serve vulnerable and traumatized children. To do this, it's important to identify which programs are responsive to diverse student populations and which are most effective and sustainable. Our research shows that school-based trauma-responsive programs use a number of whole child and systems-oriented approaches. These approaches provide safe, nurturing, and supportive learning environments and therapeutic interventions when they are needed. They may also work to increase knowledge of trauma in school professionals, parents, and community providers. To become trauma-informed, schools must ensure that all students feel safe, respected, valued, and meaningfully engaged. Teachers and other school professionals must be able to identify symptoms of trauma and know their own biases and triggers to minimize the risk of traumatization. Social-emotional skills must be incorporated into classrooms to promote resilience and effective communication, and school professionals must establish and reinforce clear expectations for behavior. These core components can also be applied to other settings, such as child welfare and juvenile justice, to develop a broad and bold transformation of our child-serving systems.
All right, so I feel like that did a really good job of kind of summarizing a lot of what we want to cover today. And let's go back to our presentation. Go. So ACEs, you heard that statement. ACEs are adverse childhood experiences, and we definitely want to make sure that all of our school staff are aware of this particular issue because it affects so many of us. You can see here in the slide that we see abuse, physical, emotional, sexual abuse, neglect, like physical or emotional neglect, along with household dysfunctions like mental illness, incarceration, mother being treated violently in a domestic violence type situation, substance abuse, or even an absent parent or divorce situation. These are all potential ways of inducing some kind of adverse experience on a child. And the more we have of those, the more likely we are to, maybe make negative choices in the future, get involved in drugs or alcohol abuse, you name it. So I think it's really important for us to be aware of at least some of the elements here and how easy it is for so many of us to experience these. Okay, so for all those teachers out there, I want you to look at this slide in particular and think about some of the kids that you work with. What do you see? What are the commonalities? Do you see kids who maybe show some irritability? Maybe they are numbing or feeling hopeless. Maybe you notice that they have a real intense startle response, or feeling some kind of self-hatred, maybe even some self-harming behaviors or suicidal thoughts, panic attacks, overwhelming emotion, eating disorders. These are all potential things that you might see in the classroom as a direct result of trauma. And so again, the list is, huge, but I want you to be thinking about these things. And instead of thinking about, oh, that troubled kid, or, oh gosh, that kid, I'm going to get him next year, or I'm going to get her, I know what kind of behaviors they're coming with. Think about what's causing some of those behaviors, what's happening at home, what maybe they have experienced that are resulting in some of these behaviors that you're seeing. And on this slide in particular, I want you to think about what are some of these elements. These are the top 5 risk factors or vulnerabilities that we see in both labor and sex trafficking. So what are the things that you're seeing commonalities here? Think about that for just a second. Okay, I'll point out a few of them since, we don't have a lot of people in the room to talk about them. Unstable housing, substance use, relocation, or migration. Those are the top 3 things that I see in those commonalities there. So if we think about that, unstable housing, substance use, maybe even the mental health concerns, right? These are some major elements of concern, but how many of our families are experiencing these same things? That is putting them at greater risk for potential trafficking. So again, thinking about them, making sure that we're aware of what the risk factors are that are creating major vulnerabilities in our community. Okay, and this is the continuum of sexual abuse. I'm going to go into this more tomorrow in my presentation, but I just want you to think about this briefly. If a child starts experiencing some form of sexual abuse in their childhood, typically the person who's doing that, the person who is taking advantage of that child, is somebody that they love and or trust. And so if they're linking that with sex and or abuse, their boundaries get blurred, things start going haywire, things are not going the way that they maybe should be for that child. So again, I want you to join me tomorrow in our panel discussion tomorrow afternoon, and we'll discuss this a little bit more in the discussion around sexual abuse. But the reason that that's important is because approximately 90% of CSEC, commercial sexually exploited children, have a history of abuse or neglect. And between 70 and 90% of CSEC victims have some form of child sexual abuse in their past. That is why this is so important, because we know that just the fact that that child has experienced some form of child sexual abuse makes them 28 times more likely to become a victim of exploitation in the future. This is a major vulnerability, major red flag that we definitely want to highlight, and we want teachers, community members to be aware of so that we can really bolster the resources around those individuals who have experienced some form of sexual abuse or maybe at high risk of sexual abuse. The other element that I want to point out here is that Black and Brown communities are at higher risk. We see in certain studies, in particular, one in South Dakota that was done around survivors of sex trafficking, that 40% of the survivors were Native people that only represent 8% of the total population. Major disparity, right? And so, again, we want to make sure that we're identifying that the Navajo Nation, the community, is at greater risk as a result of being a Black or Brown community. Some of the important information that I know you're probably familiar with, but I want to also highlight here, is that online enticement is happening at more rapid rates than ever before. Due to COVID-19 and kids being home with potentially unlimited access to the internet, traffickers took full advantage of this opportunity to recruit kids online. And so we see that NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, they identified that there was a almost 98% increase in online enticements. This is a major, major concern, right? Our kids have access to the internet, and we want to make sure that they are not being exploited or enticed to get into an exploitive situation. So I'm not going to go through the details of this, but this is a resource that I have uploaded in this particular workshop in SHED, or how do you say it? Sketch, I don't know. Anyways, it's one of the great resources that's in there for you, but this is put out by the U.S. Department of Education. And if your schools are using a multi-tiered system of support like we do in California, or a PBIS system, this is a great resource for addressing child sex trafficking in particular in your school setting. So there's hope. We must build resilience. This is what I'm getting at here. So what do we do what do we need to do in schools to build that resilience? Catherine Chin said that the best defenses against human trafficking are healthy families and strong communities. And I think I just heard the First Lady say something very similar to that. It starts in the home, it starts in the community. We've got to start really changing how we're raising our kids, right? And building that resilience into them, building empathy into them at an early age. Here are two more resources that are in your list under the workshop. We've got a Hanover handout of best practices for trauma-informed instruction in school. And I've also included all the different 40 developmental assets for kindergarten all the way through 18 years of age. So first we need to be trauma informed. That's number one, right? So Hanover provides some really great resources. I want you to look at that in depth when you have time. But teachers can identify students coping with trauma by looking for the behavioral and emotional and academic symptoms that indicate a student may be experiencing trauma. Teachers can also support students coping with trauma by establishing meaningful, positive teacher-student relationships, which help students feel safe and supported to learn. Developing positive connections with students experiencing trauma requires teachers to model and teach strong social emotional skills. And this can be really hard for those of us who maybe didn't necessarily grow up with some of those skills being taught in our home or in our community. So teachers should develop strategies and skills to notice and de-escalate a student's behavioral or emotional overreaction. Some sample strategies include calming, redirection of that student's behavior, offering support and choice, and avoiding escalation responses like raising our voice, right, when they're getting upset or escalated, or getting physically closer to that individual when they're already escalated, right? We want to make sure that we're not increasing the escalation, but trying to decrease that escalation. Again, just please check out the Hanover document and the 40 developmental assets. Again, we just don't have the time to go through all of them in this workshop. So this is a really great, simple resource that I want to include, and please go check out echotraining.org if you're interested in downloading this or any of their other infographics to be able to hand out to your teachers or school staff in your community, because it is a great, simple way of remembering the do's and don'ts of trauma-informed, compassionate classrooms. So create a safe place. Establish predictability in that environment. Build a sense of trust between the teachers or the staff and the children, so they know that they can go to you if they need support or help or resources. Offer choices when possible. I know sometimes in school it's not possible, but maybe they have a choice of doing this math versus this math, right? Or maybe they have a choice of taking a break now or in 5 minutes. Maybe they have a choice of doing a de-escalation breathing technique in their chair or going to a calming corner in the room. Stay regulated yourself. This is so, so important in working with trauma-informed anything, right? We have to stay regulated. We have to learn our own coping strategies to be able to help and deal with these situations. So don't punish kids for their trauma symptoms. That's the only don't here, really. Don't punish them for the experiences that they've already had that are resulting in these trauma symptoms. We do want to foster safety. And these are some of the key elements of how we can do that. Maybe playing classical music in your classroom, deep breathing, stretching, yoga, model and practice those things with your kids so they can see that you value that too. Specific directions instead of calm down, right? Telling them, okay, I need you to take a deep breath with me right now. Right? I need you to sit in your chair quietly so we can relax. Whatever that might look like for that particular situation. We want to watch out for too many sensory inputs. Too much of that can be an overload, especially if somebody's experienced trauma in their past. Maybe taking a walk outside or taking a break. These are really great grounding techniques that we can all use in our day-to-day life. So how do we build resilience? We want to label those emotions, demonstrate coping skills, embrace mistakes when they happen, be optimistic, model. Again, model, right? I can't say that enough. And get outside, take a break, do those grounding things, right? You guys have an amazing community here with wonderful resources. I think it sounds like it would be a wonderful opportunity. So all of these things are teaching kids that we care about them when we model that respect for them. So prevention is so important here as well. This is a resource called netsmartskids.org. It's a free resource. It's provided by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And it is so great. There's games, there's internet safety techniques, there's all kinds of resources for kids of all age groups. So I would just want to encourage you all to go through there. Check it out, use this with your own children, in your schools, as a social emotional learning opportunity, as a safety net for your kids, right? Building that fence before they fall off into the canyon. Another app that I want to highlight is Canopy. It's a parent control app that can be used on all of your smartphones and devices that kids have access to. Building safe relationships, building empathy for human life. These are some of the most important things that we want to teach our kids, and we want to develop those connections and resources. Don't let your kids fall into this trap, right? OnlyFans, right? This has been made popular over COVID, really. But it was made popular kind of by Bella Thorne, who's like a famous actress or something like that. I don't know. But the average content creator makes less than $200 a month. But they want to present it as something that is, fast money, easy way to access whatever you want in life by maybe selling some nude photos or other things. Thinking selling nudes or being a sugar baby or something like that is not normal, and it's not okay. We want to teach our kids that there is value, right, in who we are and what that looks like. And we don't want to be leaving them open to potential exploitation by these online predators. So how can you report human trafficking? I never end a presentation without talking about this. Call the National Hotline for Human Trafficking if you suspect that somebody is involved in a trafficking situation, or if you yourself or a friend need help or support. 888-3737, 888. Or you can always text Be Free. That's 233733. These are 24 hours, 7 days a week. Anywhere in the United States, you can access resources, get connected, or report suspicious activity. So please put this information in your phone if you don't already have it. I just want to say thank you. These are some of my resources. And check out, if you haven't already, the Ending Human Trafficking podcast. It's a great resource where you can glean so much information about human trafficking and all the ins and outs of it. And that will conclude my session. So thank you so much for everybody that has joined us today. I really appreciate you, and please stay on, keep going for the rest of the conference this week. Thank you so much.
To be so stressed and overwhelmed that you feel like you need to talk to someone about it.
Okay, well, again, we're glad that you have joined us for the Native Christian Leadership Forum. This has been an excellent session. I got to tell you right now, my heart is stirred. And there have been several things that have been mentioned that I think is a real challenge to us as the church. And how do we begin to reach out to those that have been abused? And I know, and I see this many times in reservation after reservation. So my heart is broken in that sense. I think of a couple things for those that are watching this by stream. I want to encourage you to ask questions, because if you're like me, your heart was touched, okay? And I want you to write down your question, send it to us, and we want to begin to ask some questions about that. Another thing I think of too, and just several thoughts were going through my mind, is this next month, this is October. In the month of November is Native American Heritage Month. And what we're doing in Chief is we're looking at each day to present a prayer request, how to pray for Native America. I get this asked all the time. So that is one thing that I would like to pose, even as a beginning, to Matthew, is if you, Matthew, you're going to be in front of a lot of people, and I get people all the time just touched, whether it's prayer or whatever, and they said, how can we pray for your people? And I would say, in this specific issue, what would that look like? And so, and then what I would say is, in November, let's be committed to pray for that one request. Okay? So Matt, if you come up, and we're glad to have you here.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for the kind remarks, making sure the microphone's on. We are on. We did learn about a lot of things, and we talked, and we're ready to kind of dive into this issue again. And before I talk about anything else, Brother Huron, I want to say how we can pray together as a community, specifically in this area of human trafficking, sexual abuse, is pray for restoration. Pray for a restorative narrative. Pray for just peace in the home. It's so many different factors that we talked about that kind of go into this. And really, it's overwhelming sometimes for me to even talk about issues like this. And it's hard for me to kind of comprehend, like, what do I need to pray for specifically? And I feel like most recently in my heart, God has been telling me in the past couple months, some stuff was happening, and I was dealing with a couple of students who were talking to potential predators online. And mind you, these students were of the ages of like 9 and 11. And they had access to their school iPads during the pandemic. They took it home, and they jailbroke it or whatever, and they were actually talking, that they got exposed to pornography, and they were text messaging people and emailing people, strangers at this age, strangers of like the age of 50, 40, 60, telling these kids that they love them, that they're going to take care of them, come meet up with me. And these things were happening, and it was so overwhelming for me. And God said to me, and I was asking Jesus, like, why is this happening like now? Why is this happening during the pandemic? Like, what are we doing? How can we address this? And God said to me, Matt, pray for light, because where light comes, I'll expose the darkness. And out of all of these things, God is just continually exposing darkness. And I have to realize that for there to be light, darkness has to be exposed. And so if there's anything we can pray for, it's to pray for these things to come. A lot of our victims of trafficking or sexual abuse, they don't come forward. And that's a part of that light process of exposing this light to them so that they can come forward and take that step of faith, especially for our victims who are male. A lot of our male victims that we know and don't know about, who have been sexually abused or in some way harmed sexually, they don't want to come out. One of the most powerful moments in my life was hearing this story about a restoration conference for Native people, and hearing this man who was around 80 years old, and he talked about his childhood and how he was sexually abused. And as tears filled his eyes and he just began to bawl, and at his age in the 80s, he said, "I've never told this story to anyone. And it's been eating me alive for all these years, and I just have never felt a place to tell my story." So, if there's something specific that we can pray for today, it's to pray for that light, to pray for the light of Jesus to expose these areas of darkness so that we can help heal, we can help restore, and we can help bring peace to these homes and to these victims everywhere. So, Brother Huron, I hope that kind of specifically for Native American Heritage Month, as we're preparing for November, that we talk about just the exposure of light on all of our communities across Native America everywhere, in the US and in Canada. So, before we go on, if you're in this room, if you're online, I want you to do something with me. We're going to do a grounding exercise. Sometimes these topics can be really, you can think about these things for hours and days and months and years even. Some people are like, how have I let this happen, and how have I done this? This is not on you. But now it is, because you've learned about this issue, and we're being called to steward this issue and to effectively reach people who are victims of this. So if you're in this room and if you're online, I want you to do something with me. I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to make a fist. And when I count to 3, I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, and you're just going to squeeze as hard as you can. So 1, 2, 3, squeeze, 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 and then breathe in, and then exhale. We're going to do this one more time. 1, 2, 3, squeeze, squeeze as hard as you can, and then breathe in, and then breathe out. Okay, we're done with that. That's just kind of a little exercise I like to do with some of my classes, just to bring us back here and bring us back into this circle, bring us back to reality, so we're not pondering and thinking about all of the different narratives that could potentially happen. We're in the now, and we can talk about this. So, we learned a lot about what human trafficking is. We learned about what some possible risk factors are. We learned about different areas that we can be a part of, or that we've seen to be factors of sexual abuse and human trafficking, labor trafficking as well, sex trafficking and labor trafficking. So now I want to talk about how we can be an ally. So there are many different ways to be an ally. And this one is just kind of like a broad generalization that I show to my students when I do this class or training. And number 1, I'll give you all the resources for the human trafficking hotline. If you see anything suspicious, report it. No matter where you are, we need those things to be documented, and we need it for statistics. So if you see something happening, report it. Wherever you are, in an airport, or if you're at home, convenience store, literally wherever you are in your homes. If something seems off about some situation, I know on social media something for domestic violence that I've seen is people putting up like 4 and then they're like squeezing their fists. That's something that's going around social media that you can familiarize yourself with, being something related to domestic violence. Number 2, make ethical purchases. And when I see this, I'm not saying to go buy the most expensive thing that was made ethically. I'm just telling you to be aware that there are some companies that have, and you can do your research. There are some companies right now who are being accused of labor trafficking, whether it's clothes, fast fashion is a reality. You're always hearing, oh, what's the spring collection, the winter collection, the fall collection, those things, and fashion's happening fast, which means that there's a demand for it. So if there's anything you take away in this human trafficking conversation, where there's a demand for human trafficking will happen. This thing brings money. Something we didn't talk about that I want to mention now is that human trafficking is a for-profit business. So traffickers, people who exploit people, they're doing this for money, and they're business people. Human trafficking is a $150 billion annual revenue. Yes, I said billion with a B. $150 billion every single year is what we can estimate that human traffickers across the world are creating in profit from labor trafficking and sex trafficking. So we have to be aware of all these ethical purchases that we're making. Sometimes it's not the stores that are selling the clothes, but it's not even the manufacturers who are sewing your clothes, but it's the harvesting of the material from your clothes. There's a really cool app. I don't have it on here. It's called Sweat and Toil. And that's always like a fun one for students to interact with. And you can actually go on there and log in what you've bought, what you've done for the day, if you drank Starbucks or any other thing. And it tells you like what could potentially be made by slaves across the world. And it's a really fun resource if you think that you or someone like a student would be interested in that. Make ethical purchases. So just be aware of those things, not even just in clothes, but in food, all the way down from coffee to chocolate. These are things that we may not be aware about. I was a barista at Starbucks for 5 years, so I can tell you a lot of our coffee beans are ethically harvested and they're ethically produced, and that's why we complained about how much our coffee is today. So we're expensive. Starbucks was expensive because they want to make sure that everything is ethically sourced. So just a fun fact to throw out there. I always tell my students to be cautious of pornography. Don't buy or watch porn. This just increases the demand of human trafficking. And I know it's kind of like it's an iffy topic in the church today. Like, can we talk about this? Can we not? And I think we should. We should be discouraging our students from this, especially in Native America today. I have seen a lot of resources for Native people that are more on the secular kind of areas, and they support pornography because it's sexual education. But in this instance, we discourage it because it really emphasizes different fantasies, and it really it's a disconnect from God, and it's not healthy for students in our statistics everywhere. It's not really educating our students the way that they should be educated, and a lot of the times pornography has victims of human trafficking that are being exploited. And I've seen that happening firsthand from different people. Also, watch documentaries on human trafficking. Listen to podcasts on human trafficking. Here are a couple here's a podcast that I was able to help work on with our director for the Global Center for Women and Justice. It's called Ending Human Trafficking. If you have Spotify or Apple Podcasts, type that in, and you'll hear a bunch of different ones. And actually, our First Lady of the Navajo Nation, Fifilia Nez, was actually featured on one of those. So those are happening right there. We talk to different people across the world. So get connected in some of those things. The Global Center for Women and Justice, which is where I used to work at and I interned, is a great place to kind of set some foundational works. Ask us. We'll tell you some good resources. There's a documentary that was released a couple years ago called Boys, which was really, really impactful because it talked about male trafficking victims of prostitution. And because we don't hear those stories sometimes. So watching the right documentaries are what we need to do, not the fantasized kind of like Taken I mentioned earlier, or these romanticized versions of, I'm going to save this person and rescue them out of trafficking. Those things are actually more harmful than they are good. And then this one, tell others what you have learned today. So I empower you all to now be the teachers. You and me are in this together. We're a partner here. So go and tell somebody. With the power of one, right? We always talk about this power of one. You tell this person that something you learned today, hey, this is happening. And they say, oh my gosh, I'm a business owner. I see that. I can make my rules more ethical. Or, oh my gosh, I've seen this happening. Or I've seen this going on today. Tell your friends those things. Tell your family those things. Your kids, your grandkids, of the things that you've learned today in your circles. Kind of Native related. Also, check up on your friends. After this whole pandemic, it's still hard for people mentally. People are still struggling, and people are still in need of different necessities. This pandemic really, really released a whole new wave of interactions for human trafficking because it's reverted to more online trafficking. Trafficking started being more aware. But what was crazy is that in our statistics, trafficking reported online actually declined during the pandemic than when it was before the pandemic. So that just means people are not reporting it. People are not reporting child pornography, or they're not reporting different areas where people are being sold. Like I mentioned, the girl being auctioned off on Facebook Live. People aren't reporting those things. So it's important for us to check up on our friends, check up on our family members, and whatever they're going through. During the pandemic, it was crazy. It was the first time I've ever met somebody who didn't have food for 3+ days. They didn't have water, they didn't have a vehicle, they didn't have food, and like their close relatives had just passed away from COVID, and this was their reality, and it's still a reality for many people today on our reservations and in our tribes. So check up on one another. And the biggest way that I can call you, that you're here and I can call you, is because we need you. We need you in this fight. I know maybe this is not something you're as passionate about as some other topics, but we still need you. Right now, as I said, we have 40+ million people around the globe that are being trafficked, many of them here in our own country and in our own state. I think I saw McCain Institute released a report a couple years back that said Arizona Mills right here is the capital for human trafficking in the state of Arizona. And that's not just grabbing kids off from the different stores. No, we're not talking about that. It's recruiting. This is where kids are meeting other kids their age who say, hey, let's become friends, let's exchange phone numbers, and then that's how the things fall into place. So we need to make sure that we are taking care of our students and we're taking care of our relatives. But in reality, we need you. I can't be the only one giving these presentations, is what I tell all my students everywhere. We need you to be talking about this. We need our pastors to be talking about this. We need our youth leaders and at every level of the church, we need them to be talking about how we can educate these things. So as I mentioned to you all about the human trafficking hotline, you can call 1-888-3737-888. So hopefully it's kind of easy to remember. 888 in the front and in the last part, and then 3737. That spells out Be Free, or you can text Be Free to 3737 or 233-733. Sorry about that. So text Be Free to that hotline. And I just wanted to say those are some different ways that you all can be allies. Is we have to study the issues, learn the causes, and then be a voice. So that's what we talk about all the time in my education system, is we have to study these issues and then do something about it. So that's what I did, and I hope this is a little glimpse into my world of how I got introduced to human trafficking and wanting to be a partner in ending human trafficking. My goal, I say in this area, really my goal, my life goal, my mission, I feel like by God, is to end human trafficking on all tribal nations. And that's what I'm going to keep doing until the day I die. So I want to say, thank you. And this is some of my contact information if you choose to reach out to me personally. My email for my work is mholgate, my first initial, last name, @sagu.edu. So that stands for Southwestern Assemblies of God University, mholgate@sagu.edu. And then on social media, at Navajo Matt on almost every platform, so you can find me there. So I want to say thank you, and I think we're going to open it up for some questions now. So I don't know who can lead this out.
Okay, so we got a question online asking to please elaborate on the meaning of state of forced labor.
Yes, I can totally do that. I won't. Yeah, so the question was to reinstate or talk about state enforced labor, or elaborate it. Yeah, so state enforced labor is labor that is being forced upon individuals by a government. So for example, if you Google or look up the Trafficking in Persons report, it's called the TIP report. So the United States government works with the United Nations to create an annual report that's released every summer, and it lists almost every single country that is reported on. So we have countries from Paraguay, Uruguay, United States, UK, we even have Syria, Iran, different countries, so they're different tiered. Right now, the United States is usually at a tier 1, which means that we are doing what we can as people. We have NGOs that are working, we have resources, and we're also in support with the government. And as you get further, tier 1, tier 2 watch list, tier 3, we see that those people have no resources in their countries. Countries like Syria, countries like Iran, Afghanistan, they don't have resources, and they also don't have government support. So that means that the government is, in those countries, today, they're using people to do state-imposed work. I think a soldier from a country in the Middle East, he had talked about an atrocity where their government, for winning battles or for just complimenting their military, they would bring in young girls under the age of like 15, under the age of 10, and they would use them for their sexual pleasures. So those are forms of sexual trafficking that are state imposed because the government is supporting them. So, any other questions?
Are there any questions in the audience?
Audience questions?
I have one. Oh, all right.
So you probably get asked this a lot, but or maybe you don't. I don't know. If someone experiences sexual abuse in the church, and they're blaming God, or they have a skewed image of Christ or Christians, how do you respond to that tough question?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And if you didn't hear, the question was, how do you respond to someone who's being sexually abused by someone in the church and they're questioning their faith, right? Correct? And I always tell my students in the Christian context that we are not here, your pastor didn't die for you. You know, your youth pastor didn't die for you. I go off the list and I say, but Jesus did. It's not, you know, we can go into this whole conversation about the church doing all these horrific things to Native communities in the US and Canada for years and years, for 500 plus years that we're living in today. But man did that. Jesus didn't do that. Jesus loved you so much that he died for you, that he gave his only begotten son, Jesus. God gave his only begotten son, Jesus, to die on a cross for you. And that's kind of where I start the conversation. And after that, you know, you have to talk to these people who are being abused or have been abused in the church to really put their faith to the test, because it's not easy. And this is where you see discipleship and partnership come into the church. And this is where it's so important to have a community, because you can have a community where you're surrounded by other individuals who could potentially be at the same thing, and you use that to empower those things. So I think to start a foundation is you tell them, this is an act of man, it's an act of sin, and these things Jesus didn't do, because Jesus wouldn't. And it's really, you just need to, it's kind of like Christianity 101, because sometimes we're so fast to blame God, but in reality it's because of out of our own sin and our own wickedness that we allowed sin into this world, that we forget, wow, Jesus, you know? So it's Christianity 101, and I think that's where we need to start.
Awesome, thank you. Is there any more questions with anyone in person?
Okay, this Huron. I was talking with Matt, and Matt, I know that you have worked with the Navajo Nation, and you worked with the vice chairman's wife. But I would be interested to know just what's going on. What was her perspective in the Navajo Nation? And yeah.
Yeah, we've done a lot of work currently. We're still in the process of doing work with our Office of the First Lady and Second Lady of the Navajo Nation. If you don't know who they are, they're phenomenal individuals who are so passionate about this topic. First Lady Cecilia Nez and Second Lady Dottie Lizer are, right now, the way we address this is we talk to them about their platform, and they're probably one of the first like First Lady, Second Lady duo that I've seen have a platform coming out of my tribe. And their platform this year, or for this term, their administration term, was focused on the family unit. And when there is a healthy family, we have healthy children. And there is a culture in Africa that I just thought of when we're talking about ensuring that our students are in a healthy environment with a home, with parents, with grandparents who love them unconditionally. There is a tribe in Africa, and you don't go there and you don't say, like, how are you all doing? Like, how's everyone doing? You ask, how are the children doing? Because if the children are doing okay, they're thriving. If the children are good, there's education, there's safety, there's community, there's all these different attributes. So they ask, how are the children? They don't ask, how are you doing? And that's something that I really felt like correlated with, the vice president's wife, talking to her about this thing, and talking to both her and the first lady about this topic was really centered around the children and ensuring that our children are being put first. So the work that we've done together, we've established the first conference on the Navajo Nation that addresses human trafficking specifically. We're talking about Human Trafficking Awareness Month. We're doing a lot more work towards addressing sexual abuse, not just at school, but also in the families. We want to bring in more parents to the table and talk to them, grandparents, and say, this is what's going on, and this is how we can address this. So we've been doing phenomenal work, and the government has been behind us so much, and I'm so appreciative for both of them. Yeah.
Okay, for our last question, do you have any future planned events, and where?
Yes. So I know it's a little bit in the process. Being back here in Arizona, I'm getting my feet firmly planted, but I'm projecting right now in May of 2023, we're going to have our next Ensure Justice Conference. So I don't know if you remember my scripture verse I referenced to out of Proverbs 31:8, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves and ensure justice for those being crushed. So that conference is based out of that scripture verse. It's called Ensure Justice, and it's an annual conference that Vanguard University does every year. And what we've done is we've adopted that conference and taken it to the Navajo Nation. But this year, we're actually going to do the entire state of Arizona, and we're going to try to partner with all tribes here in the state of Arizona to address human trafficking with their government. So it's going to be a big thing, and we're really excited about it. We're working for it. The First Lady has been right by our side this entire time with our education system, and we're going to get different areas involved. So be looking forward to that coming in May of 2023. That's what we have so far. There are different things that is going to be happening in the Navajo Nation's offices that I'm usually a part of. I've been doing a couple of seminars this past summer with Amber Alert for Indian Country and for the government's human trafficking hotlines. So just stay tuned. They're kind of sporadic, but if you want to get involved, I can definitely send you newsletters. There are some churches that support me in that way financially, and so I always connect with them. But you don't have to support me. You can pray for me. I love that support as well, and I will be sure to send you some of those newsletters. So, all right. Is that all the questions?
Yeah.
Sweet.
All right. Thank you, Matthew. Really appreciate your presentation. Everyone, give it up for Matthew. Yeah. Good job. That was very informative, and I believe it made a good impact on everyone that was here and watching online. So just to conclude our session, I want to give you a brief preview of next month, the second Monday of every month. But next month is going to be Reynard Faber. He's the honorary chief of the Hickory Apache tribe. He had a pretty intense boarding school experience when he was young, and he was able to overcome that experience through Christ. He has a powerful testimony on overcoming trauma, forgiving people that have hurt him in the past, and he's an outstanding Christian. So just want to invite you back next month to join us for that session. And Billy, go ahead and pray us out.
Yep, so I'll end this in prayer. And yeah. Lord, I just thank you for this time. Thank you for Matt sharing about all the different things about sex trafficking, oh Lord. And I just pray for the people affected by it, that you'll just come meet them where they're at, oh Lord, and come and just bring light to the situation that's affecting our Native people so heavily, oh Lord. And I just pray for Matt as he goes and presents this topic, that he'll go empowered by your Holy Spirit, empowered by your word, oh Lord. And I just pray that this talk bless us and bless the people joining us online as well, Lord. And I just thank you for all that you're doing in Matt's life and all of our lives, oh Lord. And I just pray we'll be edified by your word, and let us be led by your Holy Spirit into this dark world, oh Lord. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. And thanks, guys, for joining us here, and thanks, people, for joining us online.